Good afternoon, everybody. It is Friday, and that means we're heading up to the weekend. It's our episode 13 of Lessons in Leadership. My name's Mary Gregory, and I'm very, very happy to welcome Jude Jennison today. Hello, Jude.
Hi, Mary. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Now, I'm really, really looking forward to our conversation because Jude, for those of you that might not have come across Jude before, started life, her career pre what she does now was working as a senior leader within IBM. And then she transitioned to running her own business in leadership. But what's so special about the business that she runs in leadership development is it's all specialized and focused around horses and using horses as sort of the medium to help people learn about themselves as leaders, what works, what doesn't work for them. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation, I think, Jude. So I'm so pleased to have you here.
Oh, pleasure. It's good to be here.
So let's kick off then, because I want to understand a bit more about your journey as how you got to be where you are now. And that, you were the senior executive in IBM, and now you're this amazing woman, and you're at the stables now. I want to flag that you're actually speaking to us from your stables today.
I am, yes, yeah. I'm in the warm today.
Nice and warm. So how did you get to be from IBM to a leadership consultant who runs her own consultancy and works with corporate leaders, but using relationships with horses? Tell us a bit more about that journey.
Yeah, well, it's a massive leap of faith, really. I mean, I worked for IBM for 17 years, and I joined in the early 1990s and it was a time when there were no women in technology organizations. And I was one of, I think, about 5 or 6 women in an office of 1,500 men. And I thought that was normal because I'd never been in an office before. So I didn't know any different. So I thought that was normal. And it was in the days when people would say, and they shouldn't have done, but they could kind of get away with it then, was they said things like, you'll never have a career because you're a woman. You'll never have a career because you're not technical. And sometimes just you'll never have a career. And largely, I mean, I was not only was I a woman that made me different, but I had a French degree, and pretty much everybody else had a maths or a science degree. And so it was, it was unusual in that environment. And they tried to put me on the usual path of development, which was start with a technical detail and then develop your career. And I just was bored by it. And I kept saying, can I do something else? Can I do something else? And so I asked somebody to take me to visit a client, and the clients loved me because I think I was just refreshing, because I had all this like youthful energy and excitement and people skills naturally. Yes. I am actually somebody that I'm an extrovert. I love people. I love being in their presence. And so they gave me the role as a service manager managing clients. And it was the beginning of service management. Didn't exist as a profession then. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that I created the profession, because I certainly didn't, but I was one of the first people to be that interface between clients and the technical teams.
Yes.
And so I very quickly became very comfortable doing things that I had no idea how to do. And that's how I developed my career. Wow. And I always say, I think that's what leadership is. I think it's, how do you do what you don't know how to do when you're out of your comfort zone?
Yes.
And so that's what I'm very comfortable doing. So I did that for 17 years, did a whole range of different leadership roles and managed budgets of $1 billion across Europe and a whole range of different things. And then I just thought, I'm done. I've got to a point where I'd been doing European roles. I've been traveling. I was tired. And I thought, there's more for me outside of IBM. There's another way that I can have an impact.
Yes.
In people's lives.
What I'm hearing, it's another way you can have an impact. But what I'm hearing right from the offset, there was the drive in you to be a leader. So you were a leader. You were the only woman in the office that you were in. You were asked to be taken out, saw an opportunity, maybe, not just a leader, but an innovator is what I'm hearing. So you're on the edge of innovating things as well. And I wonder if that's a theme for you, that you like to be on the edge.
Well, what I tend to do is I join dots that other people don't see. And the challenge for me often is that because I see it really clearly, I join these dots and make a picture that other people don't see.
Yes.
And then they just think I'm odd and weird. And then eventually people start to realize that the dots that I'm seeing make sense. But
Yes.
often I am ahead of the curve.
Yes, yes. So something there about you are an innovative leader who's ahead of a curve. And so you had that moment where you'd had enough. What was it that really got you to shift from actually, I'm going to hand my notice in, I'm going to change my life and change what I'm doing for my work and how I contribute?
Well, there were two things. I went to a conference, and it was an all women conference in Europe, and there were 500 women in the room. I had never been in a room with 500 women before. In rooms with 500 men repeatedly, but never with 500 women, and it blew my mind. And one of the presenters was talking about how she'd created a business in a remote village in the Philippines to support the community. And I remember being so inspired by that and thinking, I want to develop a community. I want to support a community. And so I trained as a coach, and I coached people in IBM alongside my day job for about 3 or 4 years after that. And then I've been traveling a lot. I was working long hours, I was traveling a lot. And I wasn't burnt out, but I think if I'd carried on, I would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming through Birmingham Airport, and normally on a 9 p.m. flight, they just waved. They were all businessmen and me. And normally they'd wave everybody through customs. And they stopped me and said, "Where have you flown in from?" And for a brief moment, I had no idea. And I said, "Milan, I think." And then there was this awkward silence. And the guy behind me said, "You've just got off the Munich flight with all of us."
Well, you got the capital letter right.
To which I said, "Oh yes, it was Milan last week." And I just thought, you know what, I need a break. I need to actually, if I don't know where I've been, I need a break. So I actually took a year's sabbatical. And in that time, I did a year-long leadership program. And it was one of these that strips you right back to the core of who are you? Almost like I'm a blank sheet of paper. What do I write on it? Who am I? What do I stand for? How do I show up in relationship? And what's my purpose in the world? And at the end of that year, I just thought, there's more. There's another way of sharing the gifts that I've got in a bigger way. And so I never went back.
Gosh. And it sounds like you were on a journey of your awareness opening up from being in that conference, being inspired by that speaker about starting to connect you with your purpose, and then going and leaving and doing that course that helped you get much greater clarity around your purpose as well. So what brought you towards working with horses?
Well, interestingly, as I finished that leadership program, I was frightened of horses. And I just thought, well, as part of my development, I don't want to be frightened of anything in life. And I did it as not just to overcome my fear, but because I was curious about how fear gets in the way of our leadership, because we all experience fear. And normally people either deal with it by pushing through, so they don't actually resolve the fear. They remain, like, for example, if it's public speaking, people will do a talk and they're still frightened, and the next time they do it, they're still frightened and they carry on, or people will avoid it. And so we have this kind of pushing through or avoidance relationship often with fear. And what I wanted to do was sit with it and be curious about it and see what I could learn from it. So I Googled horses and coaching, found somebody and rang him up and said, "Can you help me overcome my fear of horses?" And I spent 2 hours with him. And in the first 5 minutes, I reframed my fear into respect, because I realized that instead of being frightened of the horses, I mean, they're 500-600 kilograms. So, you know, they're big beasts. And I thought, instead of being frightened of them, if I can respect the horse and their opinion, but also have equal respect for me and my opinion, how do we then stay in relationship with each other, whereby they don't want to push me around and I don't allow myself to be pushed around, but I don't need to withdraw either. And that was that's what I learned in the first 2 hours, was how do we be in relationship with someone or something that we find intimidating? whether that's a person banging their fist on a table in an office and swearing, which I've received, or whether it's a horse. It was immaterial. It was about the learning around mutual respect and self-respect, and therefore the ability to be so clear about who I am and what I stand for that I could quietly and calmly stand in their presence and hold a very clear boundary of, you can come towards me, but don't come any nearer than where I'm comfortable.
Yes.
So there's a lot around boundaries and respect and trust. That was my first working with horses, and that was 2 hours worth of learning.
Sounds incredibly powerful. And you know, what I'm curious about as well is, because, you know, I've heard of a few people that work with horses, and I've never worked with them myself, and I'd love to. We were talking about that before, but there's something wrong. Can you say a bit more about the metaphor and how that applies? Because you work with executives and aligning executive teams now. How do you apply the metaphor of building that relationship with a horse to actually being an effective leader in an organization?
Yeah, well, the metaphor is the easy bit to get our heads around, because the metaphor is the bit in our head of how do I lead somebody, how do I lead a horse, and we can explore that. But the real learning comes from the visceral, in the embodied experience of the learning. So horses respond based on what you're thinking and feeling and all of your non-verbal behavior. So people often think that's body language, but it's way more than that. It's how congruent we are. It's whether we're operating from our ego or whether we're being authentic in how we show up. It's are we being congruent? Are we saying what we're thinking and feeling, or are we saying something else? So most people will operate a lot of the time behind a mask of some sort of, you know, I must be professional, or I must be whatever. The horses operate with like behind that, who are you at the core? Yeah. And so that's what they connect with. And my job as a coach working with them is to explore and be curious around how the horse is responding to somebody, and how do I help that person make sense of that by coaching, by being curious. But a lot of what we're exploring is the visceral, the in the body physical experience. So if I take an example of frustration, we all get frustrated over things from time to time, and frustration starts, we first notice it in our body, although most people don't, because most people have learned to shut that off. So most people, they first know they're frustrated because they're feeling cross, whereas actually frustration, we feel it in our body. And if you stay frustrated with a horse, they will either move away from you or they will get agitated, depending on the horse and depending on the person. And so it's a very visual and very visceral experience of when you're standing with a horse feeling frustrated because they won't move. You have to change your state, because otherwise you can see right in front of you the impact that you're having. And then, of course, we're having the same impact with people. So if I'm feeling frustrated and I don't actually name it, people around me will sense it and feel it. They might not know it and understand it in the same way that the horses do. But we all know when somebody in the team is irritated by us. We feel it, we sense it. And I often talk about the hidden dynamics of teamwork, because all of these things are going on all of the time in teams. Yes. So we're having this impact, but most of the time we're completely unconscious of it. Yes. So what the horses do is they reveal all of that, and you visually see that when you get irritated, people move away or people get agitated around you. And when you see that, you can then start to feel that. So for me, frustration starts in my stomach and then it goes to my chest. Yes. And once I know that, as soon as I feel frustrated, it's a red flag for me to say, oh, there's something I need to pay attention to. What is it that I'm wanting, that I need to ask for or create? Or so I can shift my state as soon as I feel frustrated.
That's incredible. I'm actually I can feel in my tummy here, I'm having a reaction. I'm finding it incredibly inspiring. That's what I'm feeling. It's like, whoa, it's just incredible that
it is profound. It is profound
yeah,
work. And I always say it's a bit like having your leadership and your communication and teamwork under a magnifying glass or under a microscope, because
yes,
it's so revealing.
yes,
And people need to be prepared for that. They need to be prepared to say, actually, if you reveal all of the hidden stuff that's going on, that we're all rumbling, it can actually make you so much more effective.
yes.
But it is vulnerable.
Yes, I can imagine. So your clients themselves must be incredibly courageous to come and work with you in the first place. So they're obviously really, really committed to their leadership and ensuring that they work together as a leadership team to work with you, because it sounds very exposing in terms of exposing yourself emotionally as a leader with the rest of your team.
Yeah, and of course, the beauty of this is because it's a visceral experience, you will feel things that you don't have to speak to. So if you don't speak to it, that's fine. People will feel something and they'll change their behavior later in the workplace without having to speak to it.
Yes.
And so, part of my debrief is to get people to speak and be more open as a team, but they only have to share what they want to share.
Yes. Yes.
They can make the shift internally without telling me. And sometimes I'll say to people, how do you make sense of that? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. And I'll say, did you feel the shift? And they'll say, yes. And for me, that's enough, because I know that if they felt the shift, they can feel that again in the workplace.
Yes, and they're becoming more aware of their internal world and how they're reacting and responding to people.
Yeah.
So powerful, Jude. Have you, I don't know, I don't need to break client confidentiality, obviously, but have you got an example story you could share with us of a team, particularly? Because you do a lot of work with teams, and your latest book is about teams as well. So have you got an example of a team that you've worked with and the impact this work had on them?
Yeah, I mean, I've got hundreds, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So one example was a team who were exhausted. They'd been working flat out for months, working long hours, and they walked through the gate. And as they walked through the gate, all of the horses lay down in the field. And
I'm sorry, but that just does sound very funny.
I know, it sounds utterly bonkers. I realise that. It's one of those things you have to see it to experience it to really get it. But all the horses lay down, and somebody said, oh, are they tired? And I said, I don't know, are you? And he said, no, I'm fine, because the culture of this organization was you keep pushing through, through.
All fine here, yes.
And especially now, because there's so much focus on being resilient that people don't want to admit they're tired, because the implication is you're not resilient enough, which is my biggest bugbear.
It's ironic, actually, because part of being resilient is being able to reach out and say, I need some help.
Yeah. And so one by one, somebody did say, actually, we've been flat out for weeks, I'm exhausted. And then one by one, they all named their exhaustion. And once every single person had named it, the horses all stood up again.
Phenomenal.
I know, it's
almost like it's like one of those woo moments, isn't it?
I mean, sometimes when I tell these stories, I realise they do sound utterly bonkers, but there were, and that's why I say there are hundreds of stories like this. But the moment people walk through the gate, I get a sense of the energy of the team, and I'm always very careful not to jump to conclusions, because of course I don't know. I'm only witnessing what I see in the clients and witnessing what I see in the horses. And of course, it could have been coincidence that the horses were lying down, but it's interesting that they did it the moment the whole team walked through the gate,
and that was the moment everybody, as well.
Yeah, and the moment everybody said, "I'm no longer," I am tired. It kind of released that. There was this sense of, oh, we can drop the mask of it being
There's
okay.
Also what I'm getting as well is how exhausting it is to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And that's why, the more you can create psychologically safe teams where people can own up and be themselves, the more you're going to have a team who can fulfill their full potential. Because wearing a mask is really exhausting.
It is exhausting. And I think that, that's one of the many things that people learn, is that wearing the mask and And sometimes people don't even know they're wearing the mask because they've learned to shut off their emotions.
Yes.
And therefore they no longer can make sense of them. And so the suppressing of the emotions is exhausting as well. And this particular team, it was so powerful for them, and as it is for many teams, but they now regularly have a check-in at the beginning of every meeting and say one word of how you're feeling. And they don't need to explain it, and they don't describe it, and they don't go into any detail, but they get a sense of, you know, Mary's irritated, John is tired, Jude's something else, and they just get a sense of where each other are, and they just go, okay, I get that. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to change anything, but I have an understanding of where everybody is and how they feel.
Yes, and understanding, and also sometimes naming something can allow it to pass and to lift, can't it, in itself? So very, very powerful stuff, this. So I'm also aware you mentioned your book, Opus, which is all about the hidden conversations, or not even conversations, but the hidden dynamics that go on in teams. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because it sounds like a fascinating read.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about this because it's my third book, and it's Opus means work. And I'm passionate about work because I think work is a huge part of my life, but I think it's a huge part of everybody's life. And I'm passionate about us doing work in the world that makes us feel rejuvenated, energized, joyful, and also that work makes a difference in the world, because I think I actually genuinely think that business can solve all of the world's problems.
Yes.
And that if we lead consciously, we can do that.
Yes.
And if we do that, then work becomes more meaningful and more purposeful. And that in itself is energizing and joyful. I mean, I leap out of bed at 6 a.m. every day, including weekends. I just wake up and I leap out of bed going, bring it on. What does today hold? And I want the same thing for everybody. And I also realize that when you work in a team, sometimes it is joyful and sometimes it's really difficult because you've got these hidden dynamics. So the subtitle is The Hidden Dynamics of Team Performance.
Yes.
Because you've always got these conversations that are going on non-verbally in a team. And of course, the work that I do with the horses is about revealing those conversations and those hidden dynamics. So when I work with the horses, they're not hidden at all. But even things like the assumptions that we make. So for example, if you have had a difficult conversation or you've been in conflict with somebody, you're more likely to have an assumption next time you have a meeting with them. You're more likely to have a negative assumption than a positive assumption about them. So what we tend to do is, if we've had a difficult meeting with someone, next time we meet with them, we go in either on the defensive or on the offensive. We go in with a mask. We go in with these assumptions of this person's going to be difficult. We label them. We judge them. We may blame them. We probably criticize them. All of that is just stories that we're telling in our head about that other person.
Yes.
That damages the relationship, so that the next time you meet with that person, you're meeting them from a place of the relationship's going to be damaged because of the stories that are going on in your head.
Right.
And so assumptions is one example of a hidden dynamic in teams. And everybody's making assumptions about everybody else, you know. There is the person that always meets a deadline or never meets a deadline, or Jude's the person that
we make decisions, don't we, on others?
Exactly. And all of that gets in the way of our relationships, and it gets in the way of the purity of the conversation. And it steers the conversation, and we're doing it unconsciously.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's all that. That's why I suppose the work with the horses is it brings what's unconscious into greater awareness and consciousness, which means then you've got choice as to how you deal with it.
Exactly.
Phenomenal. You have got so much wisdom to share with us, Jude. I could talk to you all day, and yet I'm conscious our time is eking out. So sort of in closing, you know, is there anything from your own leadership journey that you've learned that you'd like to pass on as a piece of advice, or just sharing a learning for yourself that you think would be of help to the people that will be watching now or watching later?
Oh, I mean, so much. I mean, that's why I've written 3 books, and I'm currently
Can you pick one piece out at the moment? I suppose
Yeah.
think about the current times we're in, maybe something that's relevant for the current
Well,
times
I
we're
mean,
in.
so my last book was Leading Through Uncertainty.
Perfect.
And I thrive on uncertainty, and I think it's because I go into it without preconceptions, without having all the answers, without it needing to look perfect or be perfect, but to go in and say, here I am, and here you are. What can we co-create together? And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then we'll notice it and we can try again.
Yes.
Well, I think it's about being more human in the workplace.
Yes.
And if we're more human, we can drop the masks and we can be more authentic, be more transparent, and have much more revealing and honest conversations that generate great work.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering if that's something I'm hoping that is something that comes out of this crisis that we've been through 2020 and going into 2021, that we will all be more in touch with our humanity at the end of it. Certainly it's shown up in many different ways in our communities and in our workplaces as well. And that's something that we could certainly sustain going forward. Jude, it has been an absolute delight to talk to you today. We might have to bring you back sometime, I think, because there's so much to talk about. Thank you so much for your honesty, your openness and your contribution. Just great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
And to those of you watching today, thank you for joining in. And for those of you watching in catch up, do write your comments underneath if you'd like to make a comment. We always love to hear from you and I will always respond to them. Next week for episode 14 of Lessons in Leadership, we have the phenomenal Dina Gornick, who is an executive coach and also a former actress and theatre producer. And she brings very much her background of working in that arena into her work as an executive coach. So I think we're going to have another phenomenal conversation next week as well. So do join me then, 12 noon every Friday. See you soon. Do have a great weekend and bye for now.